was little over a year ago, and
Yeah.
that was great in Cabo, and so we've kept in contact, and it's been really exciting just to kind of see what you're doing, and really, one of the things that when I talked to you, I was like, man, this guy not only has a big vision of what you're doing in the world, you have a very unique past, a past career that kind of started. Why don't you just for the audience here tell a little bit about your background, and then we'll kind of get into what Crowdpoint does, and then we'll talk a little bit about cybersecurity and how any business owners that are listening in, how the game is changing and what they can do to protect their organizations.
Yeah, definitely. I'm born and raised son of a military officer. So naturally, I went and became a military officer. Um, I decided to go in the Army. The Army graciously paid for my education. So when people say, thank you for your service, like, no, you paid for my college. Thank you. Right. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So did all the classic stuff that you might expect from a guy that was going into the infantry. I did the airborne, I did the ranger, I did all that cool guy stuff, and then found myself going to special forces selection, and then found myself looking at a couple years into my being an officer that I wanted to do other things, but I still wanted to carry guns, but maybe not wear a uniform. And so I went into a really great business where I did some really interesting things around the world, and that process led me into technology. I tell people I'm an accidental technologist, and I got into it to solve intelligence problems, actually, and started building, technologies that would defend people by early warning systems, whether it was conversations in social media or conversations in electronic intelligence, and really, felt the need to get into that. I started a company. After I left IBM, I was at IBM, worked in the part of IBM that did federal work, mostly in AI, and then created my first
Nice.
AI company. That was called Yaw Data. We sold that, and then started a cybersecurity AI company. And then Crowdpoint is the next evolution of I think it's the pinnacle of my career. We don't build anything artificial. We only build authentic. So we've built the world's first authentic intelligence decentralized cloud that doesn't lie, that requires Isaac Asimov's 3 principles of robotics, so that you can't hurt humans. And it uses math, really cool math, to do what's called deterministic concurrency and these cool waveform technologies to make sure the data is not hackable, and because you spread it out and you decentralize around the planet. So I guess my career has always been about helping and defending others. So it's kind of
Yeah.
natural.
Yeah. And as you've moved into the cyber world and the AI world, like, how would you explain if someone says, what's the difference? I heard you use the term actual intelligence versus artificial intelligence, because that's something that Crowdpoint is now doing. How would you describe the difference between that?
Well, it's much like when you think about your listeners that are in cyber, it's a lot like if you don't do governance and lineage and pedigree on your data sources and where you're getting them, you can't corroborate things. So, cybersecurity isn't about correlation, it's about corroboration, because essentially it's a crime being committed. And so you've got to have a bunch of people corroborate what's going on in order to convict the target and then prosecute the target. So when you think about combat and prosecuting targets, you want to make sure that your data sources are authentic, right? So if you don't have an authentic data sources from lineage and governance, because you've got to worry about veracity and data and the velocity of data and the volume of data. So you want to make sure that if you're going to build intelligence, you want to make sure it's authentic intelligence. So it's an actually authentic intelligence environment. In other words, what I've seen in cybersecurity and business, for that matter, is I learned that lesson a long time ago. In fact, I remember when I was the first time I heard the statement. I remember when I was going through Ranger School, everybody was using me as the RTO because I was getting a go in every patrol. I actually ended up graduating, honor graduate out of Ranger School. And so, a lot of the guys were, oh man, this guy knows what he's doing. So they'd ask me to carry the radio so I could whisper next to them and kind of tell them, how to do the plan. And he said to me, hey, the ranger instructor says, hey, Ranger, why is everybody making you the RTO? Because, putting you right next to them. I said, well, I guess, Sergeant, that they like my tactics. And he looked at me, and this instilled in me everything to what I do today. And I'll never forget it. He said, Ranger, tactics are like armpits. Everybody's got to, and they usually stink. And so from that's kind of been my anything to do with data, whether it's cybersecurity data or intelligence data. You want to look at, there are opinions out there. So you want to make sure you do everything you can to get rid of, there's always tons of signal. You want to do everything you can to reduce the noise. And so whether that's authentic intelligence and making sure it's real, or that's identifying a threat inside your network.
Yeah, I like that. So you have a very unique perspective on cybersecurity because you approach it the same way you would approach protecting a city in warfare.
Yeah.
And in the industry, most people, let's say they're cybersecurity professionals or IT directors or CIOs, whatever they might be, approach it really with a engineering mind on how to solve this. Can you talk a little bit more about, the approach, like if you were protecting a city, and how does that like into protecting a cybersecurity target?
No, and I think it's a fair commentary you just made, Ephraim, because everybody says that cyber's the fifth domain of warfare, right? So I fought on land, I fought in sea, I jumped out in the air. I've not done the fourth domain, which is outer space, because I'm not Captain Kirk. But when you look at the fifth domain, you want to look at it from the same perspective that I learned a long time ago, which is there are some fundamentals that you would deal in defending a city. Defending a city is called military operations on urban terrain. And it's so much like cybersecurity. Why? Because when you're standing in a window, that window is like a port. When you when you have a street and how you go from address to address, there's so much similarity to combat in an urban terrain than there is in cybersecurity. It's like to me, there's almost no difference. And so when you look at that, it's got to be fought like a war, because I think we're sitting at, I think these guys at Cybersecurity Ventures said that according the cost of global cybersecurity is like at $10 to $15 trillion today. So I mean that's like destroying entire civilizations, and especially now with the advent of AI and bots and the ability to buy all these kits that you can buy in the dark web. Your cyber systems really becoming unmanageable. So when you look at how you fight it like a war, the first thing you want to do is the first thing a commander wants to do is it wants to basically say, okay, if everything, especially in an urban terrain, if everything goes to hell in a handbasket, where's that last building I go to? What do I do? And who do I put there to make sure I'm safe no matter what? And it's called a reserve. From Leonidas to the current Sergeant Snuffy in the Army knows you need a reserve. Before you even get into any kind of defense, especially in a highly asymmetric environment like cyber, which is very similar to military operations on urban terrain, you want to make sure you have a reserve. And when I look at people, they look at me with kind of the RCA dog you see on the record label, kind of the head kind of cocks, and they're like, well, what do you mean? And I go, well, it means that no matter what your get out of jail free card, it's like if you're not doing massive data backup and doing backups of your endpoints and doing backups of your data, then you have no reserve. So I tell everybody, go into the fight with a reserve, right?
Yeah.
Because worst case scenario, you can give the proverbial middle finger to the threat and say, I take it, I backed it up already. And that's and the other thing that you want to do is in combat, there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of stuff, boom and bangs going on. And so what you have to be able to do is you have to distill the noise to the right signal. You got to say, this is where I see the threats coming from. I see what they're really trying to do is get there, especially, oh, wow, they're going to get on that rooftop. That's 8 stories above me. That's going to give them incredible ability to not only identify movements behind me, but they'll be able to provide plunging fire on top of me. So they're going to try and get some terrain on me. And so what that means is you've got to use those same kind of concepts. You have to understand the process of reducing their ability to get better visibility on you. And you've got to do that. And you're not going to see that visibility of what they're doing unless you get rid of the pure noise in your network. So returning signal to noise is the overall strategy that I employ in any combat scenario, because you want to minimize the number of targets. Like if you allow these guys to get too close to you, and you've got your team and trying to engage 30 targets at one time, that's pretty hectic, right? And oh, by the way, that's not good. What you want to use is you want to create a defense in depth, so that you're attriting the signal and the noise, or attriting the attack vectors, so that you can only attack one, or you can take shots at one or two guys at a time. You're going to be far more successful. And so when you think about that, in today's world, we're looking at 66% of attackers will probably use some never before seen techniques. So whenever I hear these guys publishing on, well, this is the new attack vector, I always go back to my Ranger instructor, like, hey, Ranger tactics are like armpits. Everybody's got to, and they usually stink. So just the fact that somebody's always going to be evolving and coming back with their ideas. It's going to be the good idea fairy. And so don't get caught up in the concept of new attack vectors, because 77% of the people out there are already telling you that greater than 54% of their attacks are never even identified. So you have to go back to the basics. And so the first lesson I learned from the first, second, and third domains is a fundamental strategy that most people are missing. And that is, there's really simple 8 fundamentals that I see. Fundamental number 1 is know what you're defending.
I love that. Yeah.
I want to make sure the population can get out of the city into the countryside to be safe. I want to make sure that I can secure passage for commerce. I want to be sure, whatever it is, fundamental number 1, know what you're defending. And most people don't even do some basic things. Like, I love, guys, the most exciting part of cybersecurity for me is the same thing that we did in the military. Is we always did sensitive items checks. We wanted to know, are our next generation night observation devices going to be compromised with the enemy? So let's make sure nobody's dropped one somewhere. Let's make sure that, any secure keys that we have for cryptographic communications for SATCOM aren't compromised. Let's make sure all the cool stuff that we have, even our cool stuff that we got on our armbands, that stuff is secure. We make sure that all the assets we have an inventory of. And it blows my mind how many people don't do a CDBMS. They don't even know what they own, right?
That's so true. We go in, and a lot of times we're looking at like the CIS controls, the 18 CIS controls, and one of the first things is asset inventory. Almost nobody has a good asset inventory. What's in there?
100%. And let's just talk, like, for those of you who want to keep your job with a CEO like me that's extremely type A, not only are you going to save money by reclaiming unclaimed licenses, but it really assists your ability to manage vendors, because now you go, wow, I'm actually got more. I can forecast budgeting and do all the kinds of things that guys like me want you to do, right? If you're in the IT department. So the other thing it does is that it does something that we use in combat, which is identifying the pattern of life. Because there's patterns in things. And believe it or not, every single, whether it's a hardware asset or technological asset, has a pattern of life. And once you understand those patterns, it helps you in that first problem of reducing the signal to noise ratio. So really important to inventory you have and understand the patterns that it's going to produce within your combat environment. Because they're basically, when you think about it, all those laptops in there are non-combatants. You got to protect them. You got to keep them safe, right? And the second thing is, once you know what you own, you got to understand the terrain you're defending. That's a very simple fundamental. So if you don't know your network segments, like, let me give you an example. In a defense in depth, and a lot of people will talk about castle and moat, and like, look, if a mount environment, military operations is so much like cyber, because you have people that can come from every different vector, and they've got windows and doors. What makes fighting in the city horrible, and that's why in World War II you saw Russian and German tank divisions literally fighting in an area less than a square mile, because there's windows and there's doors, there's obstacles, and every few seconds it's pure chaos. That's cyber.
Yeah.
It's so because you can come in a window, you can come in a door. A window is a door and a port. Like, all of a sudden now, I could think I'm secure because I'm engaging this guy, 25 meters in front of me, but a guy that's half a mile away sitting on a rooftop with a barrett can take me out.
Yeah.
right? So you got to have that you got to understand the terrain you're defending. So key terrain in cyberspace is really similar to the example I gave you in combat and warfare, which is it's like the high ground. So defenders need to know what's logically assembled and what their key terrain is. And that will give them the advantage of, because if you know your terrain better than the enemy, a lot of times people don't realize the enemy's going in there to learn your terrain so it knows where to attack you. So in a cyber operation, you have to do some kind of analysis of key terrain, and that's going to aid you in your strategy. So for example, I look at it simple. I work from the endpoint out. So at the endpoint, the first thing is, what's my reserve? Is everything secure? If nothing's secure, then I don't want to go forward. So I got to know my endpoint. Then after I go to my endpoint, I got to go to my network segments. Then after I go to my network segments, I'm going to go to my firewall. Then after I go to my firewall, I'm going to worry about my business ecosystem. So when you look at that big wide, if you look at it as a cone, you got this big wide environment. Then it goes down to your firewall. Then it goes down to your network segments, and then it goes down into your endpoints. So one of the things that you worry about when you're in a defensive position, you want to basically use a word called canalization. You want to canalize the bad guys to where you're strongest and away from where you're weakest.
Yeah.
You see how so much of this is so cyber makes sense?
It is 100%. Yeah, it goes hand in hand.
So if I know where my key terrain is, I can now begin to start doing analysis at the endpoint, where the first thing at the endpoint is, how do I make sure no matter what, that's my reserve? My endpoint needs to have backup. Then what I got to look at is how do I engage in the threat? How do I now engage with these guys in a way that I control the battlefield? How do I dominate the fight? Well, we use this concept when you start doing combined arms, because you got lots of people and same thing in a company. You got firewalls, you got intrusion detection systems, you got all these technologies. If you don't synchronize them for effect in an engagement area, you've got one-offs. You got one-offs. You got to create a combined force, what we used to call combined arms, and create an engagement area. So the nice thing about an engagement area is it creates a unified view of your ecosystem, and it lets you build what's called a hammer and anvil defense. That goes all the way back to Alexander the Great, which is how do you let them in far enough in and then slam them from behind? How do you lock them down? It was bought by the Greeks and Alexander the Great, and then the Romans used it. So when you define an engagement area, you're essentially setting the rules of the fight, how you're going to fight it, not how they're going to fight it.
Right.
You're now saying. Go ahead.
No, that's great. Go on.
So basically, now what you've got the ability is, once you identify when and where you want to engage targets and how you're going to move them away from your crown jewels and move them towards where you can own them, you now can start using some really simple big data approaches, very simple analytics approach, and they'll basically help you. They'll help you orchestrate that engagement area. So it's called, and you'll be able to do intelligence preparation. You'll be able to do orchestration, disruption, and you'll be able to amass all your available resources by ensuring you reduce the signal. Reduce the noise, so the signals that matter happen. One of the things that I'm sure, Ephraim, you talk about all the time is the ability to reduce false positives, right?
Absolutely, because false positives are, probably 99% for most companies, 99.99%. It's very rare. You put a SIEM tool in there, and you're going to get so much noise that it can quickly become white noise for an IT department or a side, for even for our cyber team. We're looking, how do we constantly reduce that noise and quiet it down so that we can really focus on what matters? Yeah,
that's key. And so what I do, I define engagement areas as 4 engagement areas. What is your ecosystem risk? That's number 1. As now I hit your firewall, that's your perimeter risk. Then after I hit the perimeter risk, what's my network segment risk? And then what's my endpoint risk? Right? How do you solve it? I always work backwards, because that's the way in a defense in depth, you work from the last stand, where you're going to defend for. So let's start with endpoint risk. You have to, first of all, allow for the reserve, the fail-safe mechanism. So that means the reserve, as we brought from the very beginning, which is create a backup. Just create a backup. Automated backup, interconnecting security appliances with your network appliances is a must for effective defense. So antivirus technologies, firewalls, they all have to get to talk to each other. I tell everybody, we take 18-year-old kids in the military and we put them on the line. And when they're in a defensive position, they know they crawl over to the guy to the right and they crawl to the right of the guy to their left. And they go, that is my right limit right there at 25 meters out. Make sure that when you shoot left, you overlap my right limit, but don't go much further because I don't want you to shoot me. And then you go to the left guy. So they create these interlocking fields of fire, right? And I always hear people like, well, you're telling me you were fighting in the fifth domain of warfare, but a private in the United States Army infantry knows intersecting fields of fire, and you can't get your firewall to understand what your network segments are doing, right? So when you start first with the endpoint, it gets really cool, because then what you can do is you can say, okay, I've got the endpoint. Now I know what's my network segments, right? So then I can say, well, here's where my east-west traffic is. Here's my north-south traffic. Here's my port utilization, both static and dynamic. Now, after I identify that, I can move back out to my perimeter risk, and I can start identifying what's happening from the perimeter, and then who's in my business ecosystem. If you're not taking some form of threat intelligence, at least at the octet level for cyber attacks at the IP address level, you might want to consider that. So the next thing is, once you know, now you've got your engagement areas, how do you forecast the threat's most probable course of action? We call this MPCOA. So you have to create a capabilities intentions or a gap identification model. That's essentially what a most probable course of action is. And so how do you identify the gaps? It's so really simple. You can crowdsource your own technology treat your non-combatants as your crowdsourcing. We did. I went and asked people, hey, have you guys seen anybody that looked like this? Or have you seen anybody like linger around this area? Or you do this, like, oh, yeah, great. Hey, you know what? Here's some food, right? Even though it's and it doesn't taste very good. It's more food you've had all day. Here you go. Like, you crowdsource. Well, talk to your existing machinery and technology in your defense. How? Well, it's real simple. When you do an analysis, a very simple, they're so inexpensive these days. It's not like 10 years ago. Get an inventory of every piece of software on every laptop you own. Because what that will give you when you get is, one, go to the National Vulnerability Database and look up that software, do it in Excel. You're going to get a 1 through 10 score on every piece of software you own. If it's 10, it means it's really bad. If it's 1, it means it's really good. So so now all of a sudden you can rank your riskiest software on your riskiest machine. But you know what else you get out of that? You know what ports are necessary for the software to work. You also know what ports are necessary for the port ranges that need to work. So now all of a sudden, from what you've learned on your laptops, on your last engagement area, the one where you lose if you lose it, and you go to your network segments, you go, hey, all these laptops in this area only need these ports to run, and these are the port ranges. Everything else, shut them off. Now, will you have to maybe move certain endpoints into certain network segments and redefine that? But now what have you done is you said, look, I know no traffic that is unnecessary is going to come into this sector. And if it does, it's danger Will Robinson, right? That guy shouldn't be here. And if you do that, if you take and you block at the network segment level, all ports that are unnecessary and all port ranges that aren't necessary. Now, it's not easy. It's not easy, but warfare is not easy, right? And so you quit looking at this as an IT problem. These guys are trying to take away your quality of life. You have to look at this as impacting your family, because if you get hacked, there's a chance people lose jobs.
We just dealt, literally last week, we got a call from an attorney. We had to come in. He had a client and he wanted some assistance on investigation. They just lost $5 million. And the criminal had been, when we did the investigation, had been in the network listening, reading emails for months, and they had no idea. And then when it was time to intercept wire transfer, and that $5 million wasn't chump change to this company, right? They have 25 people working there. So 25 employee company losing $5 million, a lot of businesses will go under.
That's a significant emotional event. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So it's a game changer, and just kind of thinking about, and the bigger the company, the bigger the stakes, the more people it impacts.
Yeah. So crowdsource what you own, crowdsource the defendants, crowdsource the indigenous, crowdsource the people, your laptops. They are your best first line of providing you situational awareness, because when you know what software you own, and you score that software from 1 to 10, 10 being the worst, 1 being the best. Now all of a sudden you know all your riskiest machines. Real simple. Number 2, when you know what ports you don't need, turn them off. Turn them off. What you've just done is you've canalized the threat away from where you're weakest to where you're strongest. Then once you identify everything at the endpoint, you can tell your network segments what traffic to add in and what traffic to remove. You've just massively reduced the signal in your network.
Huge.
So the AI bots that you're running are more likely to identify something that doesn't belong there. Network segments are going to need traffic that other network segments don't do. That's okay. You just take the common, now you go out to the perimeter and you go to the perimeter and you say, hey, here's all the network segments combined. And here's all of the segments that say they don't need this port range in common. And here's all the port ranges that all these segments have in common. So now what you've done is you've just made the firewall more efficient because it's really saying, look, there's nothing that should go in here. And so now what you've effectively done, without even doing any super cool ninja AI, you've prepared your battle space to maximize the efficiency of your weapons once you deploy them. Now, all of a sudden, your intrusion detection systems are going to be better because they're not looking at it so much more. Now, all of a sudden, your firewall is doing a better job. Now, all of a sudden, all of your components in your network are doing far better because you've reduced the massive amount of noise in your network. And then all you have to do is orchestrate that. All you have to do is orchestrate your management approach so that you can get this zero touch or automated approach. Now you can create simple automated rules because you've removed all the noise. Ephraim, all the noise is out of your network. And then now you're so far ahead of everybody else that now you are world class. And then the nice thing about that is if you do get an incident, your network digital forensic investigation is lightning fast.
Yeah, that's huge. That's really huge. So, I mean, that gives a lot of, what I love about it is the amazing perspective of using that warfare analogy, because it really is warfare. It really is no different. And understanding your assets, understanding your terrain, understanding everything you're protecting, everything you have to fight, creating the fight on your terms versus someone else's terms. One mistake I see happen a lot, and I'd love to get your perspective on this, is I see a lot of IT departments just really relying on tools to protect them and not having cybersecurity professionals in their corner. And I like the warfare analogy. That's like saying, okay, we're going to protect the city, but we got guns, but no soldiers. Like, it seems crazy.
You got this really great rifle that can shoot at ungodly ranges with these really cool laser rangefinders that can't be identified. And I've got all this, night vision capability, and I'm going to go grab a cook and have him get in the fight.
Right.
The cook's really good at making mistakes. That database administrator is really good at DBMS. Man, they're going to make sure that your ontological and taxonomical structures are dead on. Okay, let's put him in the front lines and get him into the fight.
Yeah.
Just that dog's not going to hunt.
Yeah. And it's the other thing is even if they could put all their mind to it, technically they might be able to get good and figure it out. But the problem is, like, especially on IT departments, hey, my printer doesn't work. Hey, we need to do this email migration. We got to do this, this, and this. Meanwhile, you're also trying to fight a battle. It's a losing proposition.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about we're working together on a joint Spartan cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about that and what makes you excited about this.
What I love about it is, number one, I love working with people that I like, right? That's an important thing. And we get along great. And that's the number one thing. I always go to business with people I like. That's the most important thing about business. If you have a choice to do business, business is hard enough. Don't do business with people you don't like, right? So that's number one. Number two, what I love about it is the way we're configuring the Spartan security site is if you're going to use artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence is about mimicking human behavior, who do you want to mimic? Well, I don't know. Maybe let's mimic Leonidas. Let's mimic Alexander the Great when they were unfortunate enough to be in a defense, because nobody likes to be in a defense. It's always better than offense. So when you're on the defense, you want to make sure that you're creating a system that supports that. So what you're going to see on Spartan Security is we've assembled technologies that address those engagement areas, from the endpoint to the network segment, to the perimeter, and to the business ecosystem. And I think that's what makes this really cool, because not only do we have a technology that assemblies of technologies that we can recommend, but we have support teams that are going to be your, for all intents and purposes, your advisors to help you along the way. I think it's a mix.
Yeah, I love that. The other thing that kind of I heard you tell me was the analogy, and I was like, man, this is such a good analogy. If you don't mind saying it one more time, of like, try your daughter going to Cancun. And I know you said this on stage, and it kind of it clicked for a lot of people when you said this.
Yeah, it worked every time. Our revenue, I got out of that cyber business, but it was, I'd look in front of the room and I would sit there and I would say, guys, artificial intelligence, everybody's talking about artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. And I just define artificial intelligence really, really simple. Artificial intelligence is about taking hardware technology and software technology that works together to mimic human behavior. You just have to determine who you want to mimic. And then I'd ask the audience a simple question. I go, who in the room has got a teenage daughter? And you can see kind of the hands always were kind of hesitant, but they usually went up.
Yeah.
And I'd find someone, I'd get off stage and I'd walk down there and I say, hi, your teenage daughter just called you. She's super excited. She's met this guy on Facebook who lives in Cancun, works at Senior Frogs, and just so happens that the senior class trip is going to Cancun. And she says, Mom, can I go? And her head's moving north-south, like she's ready to go. And your head is moving, and invariably the mom goes,
no.
that dog ain't gonna hunt. I said, well, hold on. I'm sure your daughter's got straight A's and she's a great girl. You need to trust her. And this guy Hector that she wants to meet, he's probably on his way to Stanford to get a medical degree. So, we got to really make sure we pay attention to this. So let's forward the notion of providing I don't know, let's just give them someone that a chaperone.
Yeah.
They'll look at you like, okay, chaperone number one is my good friend, who's also the chief scientist of our company, who's one of the world-renowned AI experts, Dr. Wolf Kahn. So Dr. Wolf Kahn can certainly use the math to forecast all the potential threats by looking at past criminal data and give you a great idea of what the greatest threats your daughter's going to have. And so he's going to be the chaperone. That's chaperone number one. Number one. Number two is my friend Ann Keene. She's a financial genius. She literally knows finances better. She's going to make sure that the money is spent wise, and you don't get a huge American Express bill, and you're going to come back not broke, and she's going to be really suntan and happy. Or number three is my friend Kenny. Kenny's a former SEAL Team 6 guy. So you have a choice between an accountant, a PhD, or an operator. Who do you want there?
You want the warrior.
She wanted the warrior. And then everybody's like, well, so what does this have to do with the price of tea at China in a cybersecurity presentation? And I'd walk back up to the stage quietly and I said, at the end of the day, most of you are buying software technologies created by PhDs and accountants and not warriors. Thanks very much for your time. And that was it.
Yeah.
That's the mindset. If you're going to get in the fifth domain of warfare, fight it like a domain of warfare. If not, please stop insulting the rest of us that have fought in domains 1, 2, and 3 that is a domain of warfare, because you need to fight it like one. You're talking about national economies collapsing. You're at $15 trillion, I read. $15 trillion. Lives are destroyed. So don't send your cook to get in a knife fight when it's not necessary. Teach your systems to be Leonidas. Teach your systems to be Alexander the Great. Teach your systems to have the wisdom of Clausewitz or Sun Tzu. Deploy those. And it's multi-vector. And anytime you read history on military operations on our urban terrain. Look at some of the most brutal fights in history have been in cities. And that's because you get hit from under the ground, down above, from every window you can imagine. It's just like cybersecurity. Just follow a simple process of doing risk mitigation, really manage your cyber defenses in engagement areas where you can optimize support in each one. That's it.
I love it, man. Sean, I'm so glad you got to be on this. This is going to be great. I know a lot of people are going to listen to this and say they're going to want to know more about what you're doing and what we're doing together as well. And so where can they follow along with your journey and what Crowdpoint is doing? Because I think there's a big audience here that Crowdpoint can really have an impact for them as well.
Yeah, so Crowdpoint is at crowdpointtech.com. That's just like the word sounds, Crowdpoint Tech. So you have two T's, TETECH.com, or come check us out on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. You can check every day. I think I'm posting. I'm kind of giving updates on what the law of the land is and what the nature of IT looks like today.
And by the way, on your LinkedIn is a really great white paper that I think, did I lose you?
No, I'm here.
Sorry, is a really great white paper that I think everybody should look up on cybersecurity that you published. That is really phenomenal as well.
Oh yeah, that I think it was like the 8 fundamentals of cybersecurity or something. I co-authored it with with General Scott, who is the Deputy Joint Special Operations Commander. So it's a pretty cool kind of write-up from guys that were, on the trigger pulling side and then on the cyber side. It's a neat little article.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Sean. We'll keep the train moving on the Spartan cybersecurity, and I appreciate you being part of the podcast and jumping on and having a conversation.
All right. Thanks so much.
All right. Appreciate you so much. Thanks, buddy.